It's one thing to be the quiet, hardworking sibling, but it's another thing entirely when the person you've always had your back, your own sister, decides to steal your success. That's what happened to me. I busted my ass for years, pouring everything into my job, making moves that would change my career forever. But when it came time to celebrate my big promotion, guess who was first in line to take credit? Lee, my charming, picture-perfect sister. I was sitting at a family dinner, watching her casually mention how she helped me land the promotion, and the worst part? My parents were nodding along, buying every word. There I was, quietly watching her bask in the glory of something I worked my whole life for, and something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a little misunderstanding, it was a betrayal, and I wasn't about to let it slide. Before we start, type 1 if you've ever dreamed of getting revenge but never got the chance. No judgment here, and hit that subscribe button. We don't let betrayals slide around here, not even from people who don't subscribe. Let's continue. My name is Ella, and I'm the kind of person who's never really in the spotlight, but I'm always working hard behind the scenes. I'm 32 years old, and while I've never been the loudest person in the room, I've always been the one to get things done. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, that meant blending into the background, quietly pulling my weight while my younger sister, Lee, was the one everyone noticed. Lee is 29 now, and she's the kind of person who could talk her way out of anything, charm anyone she meets, and always seem like the golden child. From a young age, she was the one who could sing, dance, and steal the show at family gatherings. I never resented her for it. After all, she had a natural charisma that I didn't. But as the years went on, I started to notice something. Lee didn't just want the spotlight. She wanted to take it, even if it wasn't hers to claim. At work, it was no different. While I put in the long hours, worked through the weekends, and stayed late to make sure projects were perfect, Lee was always the one showing up at the office parties, smiling and making the right connections. She knew exactly how to make people think she was the reason for my success, without ever having to do the hard work herself. I let it slide, though. Family was family, right? But when the time came for me to get the promotion I'd earned, it all came to a head, and that's when things got messy. The promotion was everything I'd been working toward. For months, I'd poured my heart into projects, worked late nights, and sacrificed my weekends. When the news came that I was finally getting the promotion, I felt a mix of relief and pride. This was my moment. It wasn't just about the title. It was about proving to myself and everyone around me that my hard work had paid off. But the moment I shared the news with my family, I realized I'd underestimated one thing: Lee. We were having dinner at my parents' house, a casual Sunday night meal, when I casually mentioned the promotion. Before I could even get the words fully out, Lee jumped in, flashing that signature smile of hers. She didn't just congratulate me, no, she took it a step further. "I knew Ella could do it," she said, her voice dripping with that fake modesty she was so good at. I was the one who encouraged her to push harder. My heart dropped. I sat there stunned while my parents, who knew I'd been working my ass off, just nodded along. Lee was casually taking the credit for something I'd busted my ass for, and no one seemed to notice. Not even my parents. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a little slip-up. This was something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. I thought I was being smart, playing it cool, shifting the narrative subtly. But Lee. She wasn't about to let me take the reins without a fight. A few days after my quiet conversation with my parents, I found out just how far she was willing to go. It was another family dinner, and there we were, sitting around the table, pretending everything was normal. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Lee launched into a long-winded story about how she'd helped me prep for the promotion. She was going on about how she had guided me through tough decisions and helped me refine my presentation. My dad, the ever-eager listener, nodded enthusiastically. "That's right, Lee. You've always been the one to keep Ella grounded. We don't know what we'd do without you." I stared at my plate, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. I'd never seen my sister work so hard at spinning a story. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, disastrous, but you couldn't look away. "Yeah, Lee," I chimed in, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I remember you giving me so many pieces of advice about that big presentation, like, don't wear red, it makes you look aggressive." I raised an eyebrow. That really helped, but I thought my ideas were what got me here. Lee smiled, totally unfazed. "Well, Ella, I do have a way of bringing out the best in people," she said, her tone dripping with that smug sweetness only she could manage. "I knew you had it in you, but someone needed to show you how to polish it." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I wasn't about to lose control in front of everyone. The rest of the table looked between us, but no one said a word. And that's when I realized no one was ever going to notice the difference unless I made them. I was done playing nice. Lee had crossed a line, and it was time for me to take the spotlight, not just quietly, but with purpose. The aftermath of that family dinner was like being stuck in a bad dream. Lee's constant presence in my work life was one thing, but it felt personal. The worst part was that my parents weren't even questioning it. They were giving her all the credit for my success, as if she'd been there, working by my side all these years. I needed a plan, and fast, but every time I tried to set things straight, Lee would swoop in and somehow make me look like the jealous, overdramatic sister. The first real obstacle was a week later at work. We had a team meeting to celebrate the promotion, and everyone was supposed to gather for some congratulatory speeches. When I walked in, I almost choked on my coffee. There she was, sitting in the corner of the room, flashing that smile of hers. "Oh, I just thought I'd drop by and congratulate Ella," she said, raising a hand in that exaggerated, playful way she did, as though she was just an innocent bystander. My boss, Jeff, lit up when he saw her. "Lee, what a surprise, it's so great to see family supporting family." He grinned, obviously not realizing that she wasn't family to the promotion. Lee didn't waste a second. "I've been Ella's biggest cheerleader," she said, her voice practically oozing sweetness. "I knew she could do it. I told her, you've got this," she added, turning to the group with that look of feigned modesty. I nearly rolled my eyes. Lee wasn't just taking credit, she was rewriting history. I stood there, holding my breath, trying to figure out how to stop her without causing a scene. But before I could even get a word out, Lee was already deep in her story. "Ella's always been a little too shy to show her potential, but I encouraged her to be herself. I was the one who told her to go for it, she just needed a little push." I could feel my face flushing. How did she manage to twist things like that? "I don't remember you giving me much advice," I said, forcing a smile. "But you did tell me to wear something brighter next time to look more approachable." Lee just laughed and shrugged it off. "Well, sometimes it's the little things, right?" Jeff was nodding along, completely oblivious to the fact that this wasn't some sweet sisterly support. It was an attempt to steal my thunder. "It's great to see you two working together," he said, clearly thinking Lee's presence was a sign of familial unity. I bit my lip to keep from snapping. I wasn't going to let her turn this into a family feel-good moment. "Actually, Lee, I think we both know the real reason I'm here," I said, my tone calm but firm. "I didn't get this promotion because you gave me advice, I earned it, through hard work. I stayed late, worked weekends, and pulled off projects that put us ahead of the competition." Lee's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered instantly. "Well, of course, Ella worked hard. I'm just saying, sometimes it's good to have someone to talk to." "I'm sure," I replied, trying to keep my cool, "but let's not forget it was my work that did the job." The tension between us was building. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, but Lee's charm had everyone else in her corner. It was like I was invisible in my own victory. As I stood there, I realized that confronting Lee head-on wasn't going to work. Every time I tried, she deflected with her perfect smile and smooth words. But one thing was clear, I couldn't let her keep claiming what wasn't hers. The day after the meeting, I met with Rachel, my best friend. She knew everything about my relationship with Lee, and she wasn't surprised by Lee's antics. "I told you she'd pull something like this," Rachel said, her voice laced with frustration. "She's good at making people believe whatever version of the story she's telling." "I can't keep letting her do this," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm done being the quiet one in the background. I'm done letting her take credit for my success." Rachel's eyes lit up, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "So, what's your plan?" "I'm going to play it her way," I said, my mind already running through the possibilities. "But smarter, I'll let her make her moves, but I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. I'll show them who's really in charge." Rachel laughed. "I love it. You're finally taking control of the narrative." But even as I spoke those words, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. Lee wasn't going to give up without a fight, but I was ready. I had to be. The game had changed, and I wasn't about to let her win this time. As much as it annoyed me, I knew I had to play the long game. Lee had her charm, but I had something far stronger, the truth. And when it came down to it, the truth had a way of showing itself, whether she liked it or not. By the time the next week rolled around, I had a plan in motion. I wasn't going to sit back and let Lee keep playing the game her way, especially not after she tried to take credit for what I'd worked so hard to achieve. I wasn't about to have my promotion hijacked by her endless charm and manipulation. The tricky part was figuring out how to turn the tide in my favor without looking petty. It had to be subtle. I couldn't just go in guns blazing, confronting her directly every time she opened her mouth. I decided to start small but impactful. I wasn't going to make any sudden moves, but I'd learned something important. People like Lee have a way of undermining others without ever getting their hands dirty. She played the good sister card to perfection, always acting like the supportive, guiding force behind my every success. So, I needed to shift the spotlight without her even realizing it was happening. The first step was to change the way I interacted with the team at work. I'd been in the background for too long, quietly letting Lee's version of events stand. But now, it was my turn to take center stage, gently but effectively. I started to shift the narrative in meetings. Rather than nodding and staying quiet, I began to speak up, sharing more of the background behind the projects I'd led. Little by little, I made sure my role in each success was known. I didn't just want to be seen as a hard worker anymore. I wanted to be recognized as the person who made the decisions, who led the team, who brought fresh ideas to the table. But every time I made progress, Lee would show up like a ghost at my shoulder, as if she was just waiting for me to slip. One day, during a critical meeting with the senior management team, I felt the sting of her presence more acutely than ever. Lee had been assigned to attend this particular meeting for some sort of cross-team collaboration event, which meant she wasn't even supposed to be involved in the details of the presentation. But as always, she found a way to make herself the center of attention. I was outlining a major project we'd been working on for the past few months, a project that I had spent countless hours refining, negotiating, and delivering on. This was my moment to show the senior managers what I was capable of. But just as I was about to explain the impact of our work, Lee interjected. "I just wanted to jump in here," she said, flashing her signature smile as she interrupted me. "Ella's been doing great, but she hasn't mentioned how we decided on the approach for this project. It was our brainstorming session that really took this to the next level." I froze. My mind was racing, trying to process what she had just said. It was so completely ridiculous that for a split second, I thought I was imagining it. She had never been part of the brainstorming sessions I was leading, never. She'd had nothing to do with the direction of the project or any of the ideas that had come to life. But here she was, casually inserting herself into the story. The room fell silent for a second. I could see a few raised eyebrows. I knew what Lee was trying to do. She was making herself part of the success story, putting herself at the heart of the project that I had worked tirelessly on. It was almost like she couldn't let me have a moment to myself without inserting her name into it. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the edge of the conference table. I couldn't let this go, not this time. With a smile that matched her own, I leaned forward. "Actually, Lee, I think you may be misremembering a bit," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "This project was based on ideas and strategies I had been working on for months before we even had a team brainstorming session. You've been a great sounding board, but I think we both know that the direction came from the work I had already set in motion." Lee blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to turn the situation around. But I wasn't giving her an inch. The room was still, the tension hanging thick in the air. "Well, I'm glad you feel that way, Ella," Lee finally said, her voice strained. "But I know I helped with some of the bigger picture ideas." "Oh, for sure," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "You definitely helped with the bigger picture. But the details, those were all me." The room was silent for a beat, but I could feel the shift happening. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for my own recognition, I was fighting to make sure Lee couldn't rewrite the truth. It wasn't about making her look bad. It was about making sure I was seen for who I was, not who she wanted me to be. When the meeting ended, I thought Lee might pull me aside and confront me. Instead, she simply walked out, her expression unreadable, but I could tell the seeds of doubt had been planted. People weren't going to buy her version of events anymore. The truth had a way of showing itself when you least expected it. But that wasn't the end of it. Lee didn't just go away quietly. She wasn't done with me yet. And I knew she'd be looking for her next opportunity to take control of the narrative. But this time, I was ready. I wasn't going to let her take what I had worked so hard for. Not now, not ever. The game had shifted, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I was just getting started. The tension between Lee and me escalated quickly. Just when I thought I had a solid plan to regain control, she managed to sneak in and undermine my efforts once again. I was determined not to let her steal my success, but her ability to manipulate situations was unmatched, and she wasn't done with me yet. The first sign that something was off came when I was meeting with Sarah, my team leader. I was outlining some changes to our upcoming project presentation when Lee waltzed into the room, as if it were part of her agenda all along. "Hey Ella, I just wanted to catch you before the meeting," Lee said, flashing that signature grin of hers. "I had a few ideas about the visuals for the presentation. I think we should focus more on the emotional appeal of the data, don't you think? You know, the story behind the numbers." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. What was she doing here? Lee had nothing to do with this project. She'd barely even been involved in the earlier stages, yet there she was, acting like she was suddenly an expert on every aspect of it. "Lee," I said, trying to keep my tone as neutral as possible, "we've already discussed the direction for the presentation. We're sticking to the facts, and the focus is on the results." "Oh, of course," Lee replied, her voice dripping with sweetness. "But you know, sometimes people need to feel the data, not just see it." I could feel Sarah's gaze flicker between the two of us. She had been in all the meetings, knew who was putting in the work, and could tell something wasn't right. "Ella, I trust your judgment," Sarah said, trying to smooth things over. "If you're set on the data-driven approach, that's what we'll go with." I gave her a grateful smile, but Lee wasn't backing down. She simply nodded and walked out, leaving me feeling unsettled. I had dodged the immediate confrontation, but something about her presence still lingered. I could already see the seeds she was planting in the background, trying to position herself as a key player, even though she had no right to be. That evening, I received an email from the senior manager, asking for a final review of the presentation slides. Normally, this wouldn't have been an issue, but this email was different. It was filled with notes about focusing on the story of the data. The tone was eerily similar to the suggestions Lee had made earlier. I stared at the screen, a sinking feeling in my stomach. It didn't take much to connect the dots. Lee had been speaking to the senior team, feeding them her version of what the presentation should look like. She was trying to change the narrative, making it all about emotional appeal, when I knew that wasn't the angle we needed. I immediately walked into Sarah's office. "I need to talk to you about something." "Sure," Sarah said, looking up from her computer. "I just got an email from the senior manager," I said, my voice calm but tense. "It's about the presentation, and the notes are almost exactly like what Lee suggested to me earlier." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, she gave you suggestions?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "She's been acting like she's part of the project, even though she's not. Now, it looks like she's been talking to the senior team and trying to steer things in a direction that doesn't align with what we've already decided." "Are you kidding me?" Sarah said, clearly surprised. "She's stepping in where she doesn't belong." "I can't just let her keep doing this," I said, my voice hardening. "She's undermining my work, and I'm not going to let her control the narrative." I walked back to my desk, trying to plan my next move. This wasn't just about a few offhand comments anymore. Lee was actively trying to hijack the project, and I had to stop her before it went any further. But I couldn't just go in and start accusing her without evidence. She was too good at making herself look like the victim, turning everything around on me. I decided I needed to be smarter than that. I started documenting everything, every email, every conversation where Lee tried to insert herself into my work. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation again. But as I sat there, writing down the details, I realized something. This wasn't just about a project or a promotion anymore. Lee had pushed me to the point where I had to take a stand. I couldn't let her walk all over me any longer, and I wasn't going to keep playing the quiet, invisible sister. I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This was my moment. I had to regain control not just of the project, but of everything that Lee had tried to take from me. And I was going to do it on my terms. The meeting had started like any other, but as I went through the slides, something felt off. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but every word I spoke seemed to fall flat. I glanced up at the senior managers, trying to gauge their reactions. They weren't engaging the way I expected. Instead, their eyes were fixed on Lee, who had once again inserted herself into the conversation. I tried to shake it off and power through, but Lee wasn't going to let me have this moment. Halfway through the presentation, she stood up, pushing her chair back as if she had been waiting for this opportunity. "I think it's important to mention," Lee began, her tone dripping with false modesty, "that Ella's done a great job, but this project would never have gotten off the ground without some of the groundwork we laid out in the beginning. It was a team effort, but I think we can all agree that the initial direction was something I really helped refine. I froze. It was as if she'd just yanked the rug out from under me. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She was outright claiming that she had been pivotal to this project, positioning herself as the one who had shaped everything I had worked for. The room fell into a tense silence. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew that if I didn't act fast, she'd completely hijack the entire presentation. But before I could respond, Jeff, our CEO, leaned forward, clearly buying into what Lee was saying. "That's right, Lee," he said, nodding in agreement. "You've been a real asset. I'm glad you two are working so closely together. This project really shows how effective collaboration can be." I almost choked. Collaboration. I'd been working late for months, building the foundation, while Lee had barely been involved beyond the occasional good idea comment. But here she was, taking full credit for the hard work I had done. I knew I had to regain control. Without missing a beat, I cleared my throat and addressed the room. "Actually, I appreciate Lee's input, but let's be clear about the timeline. This project started months ago with me laying out the initial strategy, aligning with the team, and putting in the work to get us here. The direction wasn't shaped by just one person." Lee shot me a look, her smile tightening as she tried to backpedal. "Of course, Ella, you've done great work, but a good project always needs a little extra polish, right?" I could feel the tension in the room as the senior managers looked between us. They'd seen the progress I had made, and it wasn't about polish. It was about the vision I had executed. "Right," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but let's not lose sight of who did the heavy lifting." There was an awkward silence. I knew Lee hadn't expected me to call her out in front of everyone. The shift in the room was palpable. For the first time, I saw the senior team look at Lee not with admiration, but with uncertainty. "I think that clears things up," I added, smiling slightly. This project wasn't just about one person, it was about every single member of the team giving their best. And I'm proud to have led that effort. Lee's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. The look in her eyes, though, told me everything. She wasn't used to being outplayed. As the meeting wrapped up, Jeff came over to me, shaking my hand. "Excellent presentation, Ella," he said. "Really proud of the work you've done, keep it up." Lee stood at the back watching. I could feel her frustration, and it made me feel, for the first time in a long while, like I'd truly taken control. The narrative had shifted back into my hands, and I wasn't about to let it slip away again. The aftermath of the presentation was nothing short of chaos. Lee didn't confront me directly, but I could feel the weight of her simmering anger as we both left the room. She hadn't expected me to stand up for myself like that, and it was clear she wasn't going to let it slide. Later that afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk, I got an email from Lee. It was brief but pointed. "We need to talk now." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. She had always been the kind of person who'd rather play the victim than take responsibility for her actions. I opened the email, and sure enough, there it was. "Meet me in the break room in 10 minutes. I stood up, already bracing myself for the confrontation. I wasn't afraid of her, at least not anymore, but I knew this was going to be a mess. I had already spent so much energy trying to keep the peace, but now that line had been crossed. This wasn't about who had done more work or who had led the team. It was about control, and I knew Lee wouldn't give up hers without a fight. When I walked into the break room, Lee was standing there, her arms crossed and her expression tight. "You really had to do that in front of everyone, huh?" she said, her voice sharp. I took a deep breath, keeping my emotions in check. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Lee. I did it because I deserve to be recognized for the work I've put in. And I'm not going to let you take credit for something you didn't do." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think you're the only one who works hard? I've been supporting you this whole time, helping you when you couldn't figure things out, and this is how you repay me." I stood firm, feeling a surge of confidence. "You didn't help me, Lee. You took what wasn't yours. And now it's time for everyone to see the truth." The silence that followed was heavy. We both knew things had changed. And though the fight wasn't over, I was ready to face whatever came next. The silence between Lee and me stretched, thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. But something had shifted in me. I was done being the quiet, patient one, letting her walk all over me. I wasn't going to beg for recognition or keep quiet when the truth needed to be said. And I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling guilty for standing up for myself. Lee stared at me for a long moment, trying to gauge if I'd back down. But I held my ground, steady and calm. She was the first to break, her voice dropping to a quieter, almost wounded tone. "You think this is all about credit. It's not, Ella. I've always had your back and I just wanted to help you. I could see the cracks starting to form in her perfect facade. This wasn't just about credit, it was about control. I knew that now. I wasn't going to let her pull the strings behind the scenes anymore. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story of my success. You want to help? I said, my voice firm but not harsh. Then respect the work I've done. Respect me for once. Lee's shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw something different in her eyes, guilt, maybe even regret. The fight was starting to drain out of her, and that's when I knew I had won. I didn't mean for things to get so messed up, she admitted, her voice quieter now. I was just scared that if I didn't push, I'd lose everything. Her vulnerability surprised me, but I wasn't going to let it change everything. You've got to stop trying to take credit for other people's work, Lee. It's not fair. You don't have to prove anything by tearing me down. She didn't say anything more. The weight of the conversation hung between us, but the tension had lifted, if only slightly. As I left the break room, I realized something important. This wasn't just a battle over a promotion or a project. It was about finding my voice and standing up for myself. And for the first time, I felt like I had truly done that. The rest, it would fall into place. The days that followed were quieter, but in a way, they were also more intense. Lee and I didn't speak much after our confrontation, and I could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just that I had stood up for myself. It was that, for the first time, I had taken control of my own narrative. That was something Lee had always tried to control, but now I saw her in a new light. She wasn't the perfect sister with all the answers. She was just someone trying to hold onto something that wasn't really hers. We didn't have a big, dramatic resolution. There was no heartfelt apology or sweeping gesture. But when I got back to work the next week, something had changed. Lee's presence wasn't as suffocating as before. She didn't push her way into every meeting or try to take credit for my ideas. Instead, we started to find a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I continued to lead the projects I had worked so hard for, and slowly my colleagues started to recognize me for my work, not just as the quiet one or the supportive sister. And as for Lee, she still tried to insert herself from time to time, but it was different now. I no longer felt the need to compete or prove anything to her. In the end, I realized the greatest victory wasn't about making Lee see she was wrong. It was about me learning to stand tall in my own success. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had finally found my voice, and I was the one in charge of it.